Hello everyone, I'm George from Ireland. So this video is going to be about the India-China conflict, which is not a full-scale conflict, hasn't been one for well, almost 60 years. But recently there was a clash on the border between India and China. China has been occupying some Indian land since 1962. Some of it they seized directly from the Republic of India, and some of it was seized by Pakistan in 1947 and then passed over to China just to ensure amity with China. Anyway, so the Pakistanis, they support Beijing on its claim to some Indian land, partly that's Champitas in actuation. Now, China hasn't invoked this as casus foederis, which they could have done. There's a very intimate relationship between Pakistan and China, trading relationship. The Chinese building an economic corridor through Pakistan, helping to upgrade the railway there, which is a parlous state, build up the port at Gwadar and so on, build a motorway. So, and both India and China are building roads and railways towards the frontier region, so they'll be able to get troops and supply them with munitions and other needfuls quickly. So it was in June 2020 that Chinese troops launched a dastardly and unprovoked attack upon Indians who were guarding their sovereign territory. So it was a shameful attack on an undefending nation. It's something which has rarely been equaled in recent historical chronicles. The Indian soldiers did not retreat. So in the face of overwhelming odds, they went to meet their deaths like the true Indians they were. They were unterrified, and they would rather meet doom than dishonor. So they would not bring shame upon their motherland. Anyway, in this supreme hour, surely every Indian worth his salt shall call to mind the words of Subhas Chandra Bose, "Give me blood, and I shall give you freedom." India's territorial integrity is inviolable, and the nation has an absolute right to defend her sovereignty. So the Republic of India has not trespassed upon the loam of another nation. Delhi has adhered to the niceties of international law with scrupulosity, and that redounds very greatly to India's credit. Furthermore, it underscores the unimpeachable moral authority of the Indian state, particularly vis-a-vis China. Now, cast your minds back to Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India, who ruled from independence right up until his sad demise in, I think it was 1964. And in his white-bread way, he trusted the Chinese. He was a true gent, but he made the mistake of believing that one good turn deserves another. And I'm afraid to say, in international affairs, that's not the way it works. And the butchers of Beijing were no gentlemen. He was a great man, but sometimes a naif. Anyway, in 1962, China launched an utterly unprovoked and infamous attack upon India. Hindustan had long proffered the hand of friendship to Cathay, but such amicable overtures were rudely rebuffed by the Chinese. India's magnanimity can find few parallels in history. Even now, India stretches out the hand of forbearance, and all too often China has seized the olive branch offered by India and used it as a bludgeon to beat the peace-loving people of India. Such shameful treachery has rightly angered the long-suffering people of India, and every sepoy knows it's his bounden duty to immolate the invader. So India's case to hold on to what is rightfully hers is morally and legally inassailable. The frontier between India and China was fixed by an international treaty in the British epoch. The People's Republic of China, that's the PRC, they did not renounce this treaty at the foundation of the PRC in October 1949. And the PRC has never sought to settle its claims peaceably. Instead, it simply attacked India to gain more land. So the Chinese dictatorship has taken the side of sheer evil against goodness. Beijing sold weapons to the Sudanese junta, knowing that they were being used to commit genocide in Darfur, a large-scale genocide which took place over several years, which was extremely well documented. And India's endeavour has ever been to advance humanitarianism, equality and equity, both at home and abroad. So a weaker man would not attack a stronger man. The Chinese military is mightier than India by any metric. India is only morally mightier. So China has advantages conferred upon her by being a control freak society without a free media, being a totalitarian state. Don't mean to be demeaning to India, saying it's not as strong as India. Well, it's just not. Sorry, India's not as strong as China. The population's a bit smaller. The GDP is lower. It obviously can't afford such a large army, so many weapons, and so on. And because there's certain things that India will not do, because that would be unethical, or that would be illegal. There are certain limits to what they'll do. And so whereas with the People's Republic of China, the gloves come off. There are absolutely no holds barred. You see how barbarously the Chinese tyrants treat their own people, and in India that simply won't do. So the government of India published a return to the killed last month, and my heart goes out to the gallant Jawans who most nobly laid down their lives for their beloved Mother India. By stark contrast, the PRC shan't tell us how many of its soldiers were slain, and there can be no clearer proof as to which is an open society and which is an oppressive one. So between India and China, there is not the least doubt who wins the beauty contest. India has freedom of expression. India has freedom of conscience. India has freedom of association. India has free elections. India has fair trials. India has an independent judiciary. India outlaws torture. India has a minimum wage. India has separation of powers. India agonizes about executing even the worst of the worst. India is a force for humanity, liberty, and justice. None of this is applicable to China. India's love of liberty is not strictly pertinent to the rightful ownership of the disputed area, but India's status as a beacon of freedom must count for something. So India's élan vital makes it alluring to many a foreigner, including your humble servant. So in the 1960s, India had a green revolution, and the government strove might and main to guarantee a sufficiency of comestibles to everyone. At the same time, the communist regime in China was starving millions of its people to death with malice aforethought. So in this case, dualism is no exaggeration. Seldom has a conflict been so categorically between good and evil. India is acting in furtherance of freedom, whereas China seeks to extinguish the last embers of liberty even within one of its cities, Hong Kong. So India's honesty and basic decency throws the Chinese government's wickedness into embarrassingly sharp relief. Beijing's control freakery and violent intolerance is worrisome. India is leagued in an axis of unfreedom to quench the flame of freedom wherever it burns. The PRC is the paymaster and the armourer of savagely cruel regimes from Pyongyang to Ashgabat. China is estimated to execute more people every year than all the other countries in the world put together. The number of people put to death in China is a state secret. Why is this one of China's numberless state secrecies? Presumably because the level of violence of the regime against her own citizens make even the tyrant sick with shame. So people can be executed for all sorts of crimes in China, much less than murder, even things like peculation. So Beijing's indifference to human suffering and its promiscuous use of the supreme sanction tell you all you need to know about this barbarous regime. Mao Zedong Zhuxi is on every banknote. Mao slew millions upon millions of Chinese people. He did his level best to demolish so much of the country's cultural patrimony in the Cultural Revolution. Yet this diabolical tyrant is lauded and exalted in China down to this very self-same day. Criticism of him is criminalized. He was an egomaniacal antichrist who made Hirohito seem mild by comparison. At least 20 million Chinese families have every reason to curse his name, but that be more than their lives are worth. His image befouls every public place in China, and the exaltation of Mao Zedong is a scar upon the conscience of the world. Now we have President for Life Xi, who boasts that his iron rule, those who oppose his iron rule, shall have their bones ground into powder. Lovely. But for once the despot speaks true. This was no idle threat. The government of China is as malign an influence in the world as you will find. the Communist Party treats its own people with appalling cruelty. How then would they treat those whom they regard as foreign devils? The PRC professes the cause of anti-racialism abroad, yet practices the most frank and barbative racialism at home. The Uyghurs are severely oppressed. Over 1 million men, women and children are locked up without trial or charge solely for their ethnicity, for the heinous crime of being born Uyghur. And this is surely inadmissible. For years and years, the PRC blandly denied that it had incarcerated the Uyghurs. Now, the PRC acknowledges that it has held these luckless people for years. So Beijing will tell stinking lies every single day. Why would anyone be stupid enough to trust a word such a regime says? The Uyghurs are held in so-called re-education camps. The very word should put a chill wind in your mind. The few who have escaped explain they are to be deracinated there. The luckless Uyghurs are supposed to chant these totalitarian slogans until their brains are numbed, the mind befogged, the body emaciated, the spirit broken. Only then can zombified Uyghurs be released onto the street to do the bidding of the vindictively grinning masters. People who are Han Chinese. I'm not saying most Han Chinese people are bad. By no means. No one should be abused for their ethnicity. That includes Han Chinese people, but that also includes Uyghurs. Imagine if you were locked up for ethnicity or religion. Why does Beijing feel the need to compel these people? Because they're bad, says Beijing. A whole nation or religion is bad. There's no clearer example of bigotry. It's an act of the most livid injustice. Pakistani silence on this head is deafening. Whatever happened to the Ummah caring about Dar al-Islam? What happened to Muslim solidarity? Muslims are supposed to care about brother Muslims. Yet when the Mohammedans of Xinjiang are treated cruelly for their faith, there is nary a peep of protest that escapes Islamabad. China will denounce India long and loud for any transgression, real or imagined. But when China abuses Muslims most foully, the Pakistani government loses her tongue. They dare not upset their ally against India. The Uyghurs are not detained in time of war. There's no exigency. They're not doing this even as a temporary measure. It's been going on for over 10 years. Many nations have used internment in extremis. It's true that some Uyghurs seek self-determination. I'm not surprised why, given that they're so appallingly treated in China. Wouldn't you, if you were suffered such vicious racism from such a cruelly oppressive regime? So China is utterly airless. They've even banned things like WhatsApp. Even the mildest dissent is ruthlessly crushed. The government is barbarously sadistic as peaceful protesters are shot dead by the thousand, so there is no peaceful means to achieve even a modicum of justice. It is true that some Uyghurs would wish to see their sovereignty restored to them. The Uyghurs were independent as recently as the 1940s. They were aggressed by China, which is the prison of peoples. The Han Chinese rule over the much put upon Uyghurs, and this is rendered more protracted by the lights of perverted science. Facial recognition technology is now misused by this control freak regime to superintend the Uyghurs, monitored in all their comings and goings. Cameras at every access and egress to every building. It's literally Orwellian. The Uyghurs are living in a dystopia, so is there no escape from this morass of oppression? A few Uyghurs took up arms when they had no other means to liberate themselves from a regime of the most unexampled oppressiveness. A handful have struck down those whom they believe to be their false oppressors. I do not condone the use of force in this case, but if violence is damnable, then Beijing is a myriad times more culpable than the Uyghurs. Would I rather live under Indian rule or Chinese rule? I shan't tarry for a trice. I would prefer tenfold to live under India's shining aegis. If we were invaded, if we were conquered, made a colony of India, that would be far better than to be ruled by China or many other countries. Bharat has ever striven for the upliftment and the emancipation of mankind. India's endeavour is the realisation of human dignity and equality throughout the globe. India has her own development agency. Public-spirited young Indians are doing their uttermost to assist less fortunate people in less happy lands. The situation is not absolutely clear-cut. I don't pretend that India exists in a state of prelapsarian purity. For the poor in India, it's not always locus amonis. Though India is not as wealthy as China, it's no reason to subject the Indians to these barbaric depredations. Bharat is not as economic development as the PRC for several reasons. The Indians have to spend off huge sums of money fending off unjustified attacks by Pakistan. Pakistan is armed, abetted, incited, and funded by China to do this. Curious that the butchers of Beijing should calumniate the overwhelmingly secular Uyghurs for so-called religious fundamentalism, while Beijing at the same time does all it can to strengthen a genuinely religiously fanatical regime in Pakistan. And as for religious fundamentalism, what about the Chinese government itself, its exaltation of Mao, his little red book, and the rest of the grisly gang? It is quasi-religious. The reasons that Hindustan is not as wealthy as China include that India puts human rights above wealth and recognizes that value and price are not always the same thing. India has other values, moral values. India is not going to demolish the homes of poor people without paying them any assistment. There are standards of health and safety to observe in workplaces. India has free trade unions. People have the right to strike. The government of India makes some efforts to mitigate pollution, and so people can engage in collective bargaining and so on. Now, there is corruption in India, and that's partly because India has fair trials. You can't convict people on suspicion, and sometimes the guilty get away with it, and the punishments are not draconian. So there is a presumption of innocence. People are not slung into prison on a mere accusation for taking unlawful payments. And my God, is there corruption in China? Just because they're totalitarian and have unfair trials, that doesn't mean that there is no embezzlement or bribe taking. There most certainly is. So India respects the rights of the people and does not worship the brute god of Mammon. The humblest denizen of even the poorest state of India, perhaps it's Bihar, is freer than even the richest oligarch in Shanghai. So there are bad people in every country, and by no means every Chinese person is bad. I spent a few months working in China. I have Chinese friends. I'm not xenophobic in the least. And there are some people in India who behave in a manner which is unworthy of the glorious name of India. So some have sullied India's fine reputation, but nonetheless, India's moral superiority is unarguable. My heart goes out to India in her valiant struggle. Every liberty-loving person across the globe should stand with India and let India's cause be our own. So India, in her righteous rage, shall win back every inch of her sacred soil. The infamous aggression of the liberticides shall be given short shrift. The indomitable will of the Indian nation shall prevail yet again. The Chinese shall not subjugate the Indians, and I shall rejoice in every mighty stroke of war meted out by India. Nothing shall bring India's proud soul under, even if the last entrenchment of liberty be her grave. Those of us in the Anglosphere and the Commonwealth ought to look upon the Indians as our kith and kin, and a kindred nation owes the duty of solidarity to those under attack. India is assailed by a foe bereft of all legal or moral considerations or restraints. Though the PRC has rights enshrined in its constitution, these long ago fell into desuetude, to an extent that they were ever even extant, certainly more honoured in the breach than the observance. The regime's mercy is evanescent even towards its own countrymen. So I'm not in the least anti-Chinese. I bear no ill will towards those who are Chinese. I detest their execrable government. Its cruelty is scarcely surpassed in the annals of human depravity. I only wish that the downtrodden people of China were introduced to the blessings of liberty which have long reigned in India. By devotion to duty, unconquerable fidelity, by ingenuity and heroism, India shall prevail. May Providence bless India's arms with victory. So I pray that before long, India's resplendent deep green, virginal white, and saffron tricolour, complete with a cobalt chakra, shall be unfurled over liberated territory and flutter proudly over India's sovereign soil atop the Himalayas once more. The genius, compassion, and creativity and the common decency of Indians have long since won me over to their side. India is ancient, gallant, glorious, serene, sagacious, immortal, magnificent, majestic, and ever triumphant. That's why I recall the words of Sir Rabindranath Tagore, "Victory to thee." Jai Hind.